Well, thank you for coming, and hopefully everything will work, and we'll have a good time. I wanted to start off with a few sort of personal notes, give you kind of a little bit of a roadmap of what we're going to cover today, and then sort of dive in. This is going to be a bird's eye view, as Stovall said, of the supernatural worldview of Scripture. We're going to cover a lot of concepts today that are going to be on the surface familiar. Here's sort of a little mini grocery list. You've heard a lot of these terms before: family, identity, mission, destiny, supernatural rebellion, family, those sorts of things. But I wanted to say up front that while a lot of the terminology is going to be familiar, I can guarantee that you're going to hear things today that are going to be quite new, and they might even be a little disturbing. Just a little bit of my personal story. If you've read Unseen Realm, or if you follow my podcast is the Naked Bible Podcast, and we call it Naked Bible because we're just trying to teach Scripture with, creedal formulations sort of stripped away, denominational distinctives and preferences stripped away. What I care about is that you're able to read Scripture in light of its original context, the context of the writers and their original readers. They come from quite a different world, and they think in ways that we as moderns are not used to thinking. And for my own story, I sort of had my watershed event. If you've read Unseen Realm, I relate this in the very beginning of the book, where I was a graduate student, doctoral student at the University of Wisconsin. And by that point, I had taught for 5 years at a Bible college. I had 2 master's degrees. I was not a newbie to biblical stuff. But one Sunday morning, I was sitting in church, and a friend of mine who was also in the Hebrew and Semitics department was there. And you know how it is. You have a few minutes to kill before the service starts. And I don't remember what we talked about, but I'll never forget the way it ended. And he had his Hebrew Bible with him there, and he said, "You need to read Psalm 82 in Hebrew." And I did. And what I saw there was life-changing. I'm going to show it to you today. But the first thing that sort of popped into my head was, how in the world could I be a doctoral student and have taught 5 years, 15, 20 different classes, and have never seen what I saw in the text that morning? And it just changed the way I viewed everything. And that sort of became, just a fire. I couldn't put it aside. And it led to essentially my dissertation. It led to the book we know as Unseen Realm. It led to the book we know as Supernatural. It led to essentially what I do. And in that process, there were some uncomfortable moments, because I had to make a decision to value what the text said more than what my tradition said. And that was difficult. I knew if I did it, I was going to lose some friends. I knew if I did it, I would never be invited to speak at this or that place. And, it was just one of those watershed things. If we believe this thing we call the Bible is inspired, and we believe things like God decided, these are God's decisions, God decided to prompt individuals to produce this thing we call the Bible at a certain time, in a certain culture, in a certain place, with a certain worldview that is not ours, then we really ought to not impose our own worldview on the text. Okay? It's a simple idea. We should try to read them the way they wanted to be understood, what was going through their heads, because they're not writing from the perspective of a 21st century white guy, okay? They're just not. They're not asking the questions or addressing the questions that I have in my culture, in my time period. They're doing something different. Now, it all applies to us, but we have to realize the Bible, while it was written for us, it was not written to us. It was written to somebody else. And if we rightly understand that, then we will know that we're applying things correctly, and we will be able to understand more of Scripture. I kind of specialize and focus on the weird stuff in the Bible. Okay? I have this little, I used to say this as a professor, and it sort of caught on. If it's weird, it's important. Okay, and it really is, because there's nothing thrown away. It's not like the biblical writer is going about his business and saying, hey, I need something weird here. I got a few paragraphs to fill. So, this is part of the assignment, so I got to throw this in here. No, it's weird to us. But people living 2,000 or 3,000 years ago with an entirely different worldview would have known exactly what to do with that. They would have known why it's there, what it means, what role it plays in the bigger picture. We lose an awful lot when it comes to that. And because we do, we won't find some of the ideas that we'll talk about today in the creeds. We won't find them in our doctrinal statements. We'll just find them in the text. Okay? I mean, that's where we find them, in the biblical text. And what I want to do, I just want to, sort of prep you a little bit. Mike, you're not going to hear Mike say, well, you thought the gospel was A, and Mike says it's B. No. The things that you believe, I believe. I'm a normal, evangelical guy. I know what the gospel is. I accept it. Christ is Lord. It's an exclusive claim. There is no other way of salvation. I'm a normal Trinitarian dude. Okay, all the boring things you can, I'm that too. But the reason why I think those ideas are coherent and arise from the text might be dramatically different than you've heard. Some of your favorite arguments for things, I might say, that's just a terrible argument. Okay? So I'm prepping you. I'm used to people looking at me like I've got two heads, so that won't bother me. I'm used to this kind of look. Okay? But I will take that over this. Okay? So now you know where I'm coming from. Okay? So let's jump in. You're not going to hurt me. I'm not going to hurt you either. So let's start with Psalm 82. This was my watershed event. If you have a Bible, you could turn there if you like. I'm going to show you the text. I like people to see the text rather than what I say about it. And don't stress out, by the way. Don't feel like you've got to write down every word. I'm going to give the slides to Stovall. He'll put them up somewhere and you'll all get them. You can throw them on YouTube or whatever. I'm on YouTube about 100,000 times and don't know how I got there. So it's okay. You'll get the notes. But this was the passage that my friend on that morning in church said, you need to read this in Hebrew. Okay, it's in English, but I'll show you the relevant parts here. Let's just open up our little, if I can find my mouse here. Open up our little Hebrew section. The Hebrew line for verse 1 says, Elohim nitzav ba'adat el. God has taken his place in the divine council. If I click on God, I don't know if it'll show up. No. But you'll see in the blue column, you can at least see the blue column, we have the word Elohim. This is a word you've probably heard before. It's a standard word for God. Okay? Real easy. Well, it's not so easy when you go down to the second part of the verse. B'kerev Elohim yishpot. In the midst of the gods, you'll see it's the same word, Elohim. He passes judgment. So when I read that on that Sunday morning in Wisconsin, I knew enough Hebrew grammar to know that the first Elohim was capital G, because nitzav is a singular participle. Sorry for the grammar spasm, but that's why you know. But b'kerev Elohim yishpot, in the midst of, you can't be in the midst of one. You're in the midst of a group, and the group is referred to as Elohim, gods, plural. Now, my first thought was, okay, that looks like a pantheon. That looks like something we'd read about in Greek and Roman mythology. Unfortunately, I had a later thought, and that was, I'll bet Jesus knew that verse. I bet the apostles knew that verse. I bet the New Testament writers knew that verse. And somehow, it didn't deter them or deny a theology of one unique God and a Trinity and a heavenly. So how do we articulate what we believe about God as a Trinity, God and the Godhead, and handle this verse? Because we don't want the Trinity to be these gods here. Because if you keep reading the psalm, let's just turn it off. You keep reading the psalm, look at what God says to the other gods. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. And then he says in verse 6, I said, you are gods. Let me just creep that up a little bit. And you'll notice it's the same word again. I said, you are Elohim, all of you, sons, plural, of the Most High. Nevertheless, like men, you shall die. That's not the Trinity. Okay, the Trinity's not corrupt. The Trinity doesn't need a verbal spanking from God. Okay, and they're not sentenced to death. So we have, in this passage, verse 1, we have God speaking to a group of gods. Now, if you do what I did at the time, I said, I'm going to go look at commentaries. Surely some of my, favorite scholars, have addressed this question. And what you get is the idea in verse 1 that the gods in this council are people. They're Jewish elders. They're members of the Sanhedrin. They're Israelites. I know that sounds a little odd, but trust me. I mean, I could open up commentary after commentary after commentary, and that is what you'll read. Jesus quotes Psalm 82, in fact, verse 6, in one of his debates with the Jewish leadership, to defend his assertion that I and the Father are one. He isn't saying, look, quit being mad at me because we're all just gods. Okay, you're just like me and I'm just like you. It's not what Jesus was saying. He never said, you're just like me. Okay? But this is the common view. I ran into this everywhere, which was troubling because I knew that just didn't work. If you go over to Psalm 89, let's just click on that. Psalm 89, and you go down, we'll start here in verse 5. Let the heavens praise your wonders, O Lord, your faithfulness in the assembly of the holy ones. There's another reference to that council idea. For who in the skies can be compared to the Lord? Who among the heavenly beings is like the Lord, a God greatly to be feared in the council of the holy ones? Now, heavenly beings here, and ESV nicely gives us a footnote. In the Hebrew, it says sons of God. Okay, sons of might is not a good translation of B'nai Elim. Sons of God, it's literally what it is. Here, this council of the sons of God, remember back in Psalm 82, God speaking to the Elohim, the gods, and then in verse 6 he calls them sons of the Most High. Well, we know who the Most High is. That would be the God of the Bible. So these Elohim in Psalm 82 are sons of God, also called gods. Here we have sons of God in a council in the skies, in the heavens. Now, the last time I checked my Bible, we don't have a bunch of Jewish guys ruling in the skies. Okay, it just doesn't make any sense. But that is what you will run into time after time after time after time. So when I'm confronted with this, I'm having a bit of a quandary. And it's, again, I didn't run into this in Sunday school. I went to Bible college. I never ran into this. I taught Bible college and Christian college. And even then, in class prep, I never ran into this. And here it was hitting me right between the eyes. And I couldn't just pretend that it wasn't there. I couldn't let it go. But I had confidence that this is the Word of God. I'll bet Jesus knew this. I'll bet Paul knew it. I'll bet the apostles knew it. I'll bet the New Testament writers knew it. There must be a way to make this comprehensible. And what I had to do was I had to set aside the worldview that I had. I had to set aside what I had been taught in my tradition and just say, let's go with the text. At the end of the day, it's probably still going to be standing. I'm not going to hurt it. I'm not going to harm it. If it's the Word of God, it's not going to harm me. So let's noodle this. And again, this became the thing that drove me really through almost 10 years of graduate school, coming to grips with this as an academic. And again, as an academic, my field is just, my specialty is this kind of stuff. So let's look at a couple other passages. I mean, if you drill down into this, you're going to run into other things. that are kind of interesting. This is 1 Kings 22, starting in verse 19. Now, if you know a little bit about your Old Testament history, after Solomon passes away, the kingdom splits. So you have the 12 tribes, they split into 2 kingdoms, 10 in the north, 2 in the south. The north is called Israel or Samaria, the south is called Judah. And you've got prophets running around in both kingdoms basically saying, we shouldn't be split up, okay? Because down there in Judah is where Jerusalem is. This is where we worship Yahweh. We should be 12 tribes worshiping one God. But in the north, they're off doing their own thing. They create an alternative worship center or centers, and they slide into idolatry pretty quickly. Now, in this scene, the king of the north is Ahab, again, who's probably the worst guy, maybe next to Manasseh, in the history of Israel, the northern kingdom. And he talks to the king of the south, the southern kingdom, who's Jehoshaphat, and he wants Jehoshaphat to partner with him in an alliance to go destroy a city. So Jehoshaphat goes up there, okay, I'll meet with Ahab, why not? It's kind of like South Korea and North Korea, Let's just go up there and talk. And so he goes up there and Ahab brings out all the prophets of Baal, and they do whatever prophets of Baal do. And they say, Ahab, you're the man, go up and conquer Ramoth Gilead, you're just awesome, you're going to win. And Jehoshaphat's a little suspicious, and he says, isn't there like a prophet of Yahweh around here that we could ask him? And Jehoshaphat says, it's in the verses prior to this, it's one of my favorite lines. Ahab says, this is my paraphrase, yeah, we got one of those here, and I hate that guy. Because he's in prison because he never prophesies anything good. So that's verse 18. He's only prophesies evil, to me. And so they bring Micaiah out at Jehoshaphat's insistence. And at first he kind of mocks the whole thing. He's like, oh, yeah, go up there. You're going to win. You're great. You're Ahab. He's miming, what Ahab's prophets told him. And Ahab gets a little ticked, like, come on, give it to us straight. And so Micaiah says in verse 19, you want to know what I see? Micaiah said, therefore, hear the word of the Lord, hear the word of Yahweh. By the way, in your English Bibles, when you have all small caps, that is the English convention for the divine name, Yahweh. Therefore, hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord, I saw Yahweh sitting on his throne, and all the host of heaven standing beside him on his right hand and on his left. And the Lord said, who will entice Ahab, that he may go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead? And one said one thing, and another said another. So the members of the heavenly host, who are, again, it's a council, God opens up, if we read the whole chapter, God has decreed that it's time for Ahab to die. He's finally going to be judged for his wickedness. And then the events ensue, and we get to this scene. So God opens it up, not because he needs information. God's like, yeah, I want to get rid of him, but I can't figure out, No, he lets them partner with him to decide how Ahab is going to be judged. And they have a little debate. One said one thing, another said another. And then a spirit came forward and stood before the Lord. So we know that the members of the heavenly host are spirits. They're not Jewish guys in the skies, okay? A spirit came forward and stood before the Lord saying, I will entice him. And the Lord said to him, by what means? And he said, I will go out and be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets. And he said, God comes back, you are to entice him and you shall succeed. Go and do so. And Micaiah says, now therefore, behold, the Lord has put a lying spirit in the mouth of your prophets, and the Lord has declared disaster for you. Now, God is omniscient. So if the spirit comes forward and says, oh, call on me, I got an idea. If it would have been a dumb idea, God would have said, oh, just go sit down, we'll call on you later, okay? He knows what's going to work and what isn't. But the point is, he has a council and he lets them partner with him in making certain decisions. You get the same thing in Daniel 7. We're not going to go through all these. We'll hit a couple more in a few minutes. But Daniel 7, this is the vision of the 4 beasts, which are 4 empires. And you get down to this scene in verse 9. Daniel says, as I looked, thrones, plural, that's a plural, has an S on it. Thrones, plural, were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. Again, we know who the Ancient of Days is. It's not a brain teaser. This is God. God is seated. The other thrones, nobody's sitting in there yet. His clothing was white as snow, the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames. Its wheels were burning fire. By the way, where have you seen that description before? That's Ezekiel 1. It's the same, divine chariot throne description. A stream of fire issued and came out before him. 1,000 served him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court, the council sat in judgment, and the books were opened. Heavenly books, by the way, are an interesting topic. We did a whole episode on my podcast on that. It's part of the job of the heavenly host to keep track of everything that happens, not because God needs information or God has a bad memory. It's a metaphor designed to tell us that God doesn't miss anything. But look who participates in the proceedings. It's a heavenly council. So, you run into these things that are very easy to sort of read over. The supernatural realm has organization. It's not a chaotic mess. It's not a Keystone Cops scene. It has order and coherence. And the biblical writers, who are not privy to that world, it's the supernatural world, to describe its order and its coherence, they use a metaphor that they're familiar with, the language of the royal court. God is king. He has a council. He has an administration. The administration has certain tiered levels. You run into this in Scripture if you read your Bible closely. Now, going back to the matter of the plurality, and I'm going to unpack this for you. It's not really that big of a conundrum, even though at the time it was a conundrum for me and it was disturbing. But what I'm suggesting to you is that your Bible presumes, the biblical writers presume, and the biblical text says that the gods are real. They are real spirit beings. Some of them are loyal to Yahweh, spirit beings loyal to Yahweh. We tend to think of them as angels, and I'll comment on that terminology a little bit later. But they're real. Some of them are loyal, and some of them are in rebellion, and they are hostile to God and his people. This is, pardon the pun, this is the genesis of spiritual warfare in Scripture. It has a very long history. And when the Bible says in verses like these, my list here, that Yahweh is the God of all gods, the text means exactly what it says. It doesn't mean God is the God of these things that don't really exist. Why not just say God is the God of the Avengers, or the DC Universe, or SpongeBob, Bikini Bottom, okay? Because those are all fictional characters. It gives no glory to God to say he's better than a fictional character. Okay, I'm better than that. And every one of you are. So when it says Yahweh is the God of all gods, it means exactly what it says. Now, why does this trouble us? Well, it's kind of obvious why this troubles us, because we as Westerners, as modern Westerners, and again, I'm in there, we are trained by both our Western culture and our Christian traditions to believe that the word G-O-D, when we see it on a piece of paper, when we see it on a screen, when we see the letters G, O, and D, that those letters signify, now catch this phrasing is important. We are trained to think that the letters G, O, and D signify a specific set of unique attributes. That things like omniscience, omnipresence, sovereignty, creatorship, those are all packed into the letters G, O, and D. So that when you put them together, it refers to a unique set of attributes. That's why it creeps us out when you put an S on the end. Because we have been trained to think a certain way about a certain word. Now, the biblical writers did not think that way about the word Elohim. How do we know, Mike? Are we just supposed to say, oh, that's nice, Dr. Heiser, you have a PhD, so I'll believe that? No. You get it by doing boring things, like looking up the 2,000 plus occurrences of Elohim and reading them all. Okay, it's a recipe for curing insomnia, all right? So if you actually do that, you will run across the fact that the biblical writers use Elohim of 4 or 5 different things, just, we'll use round numbers, say roughly half a dozen things, that are not the God of the Bible. Now, that alone should tell you that the biblical writers, when they wrote out Elohim, they are not thinking of a unique set of attributes. Because if they were, they would never use the term of something else. They don't think about Elohim the way we are trained to think about G, O, and D. That's the disconnect. That's the problem. It's a problem in academia, and it's a problem just in general interest in biblical studies, anybody who's interested. We're just trained to think that way. We could go through different passages and just give you a few references. We have the God of Israel, Psalm 82:1. He's definitely Elohim. We have the council members who are not him because he's judging them for being corrupt. They're Elohim. The gods of the nations. If we looked up 1 Kings 11:33, we'd have Chemosh of Moab. We'd have Asherah, Ashtaroth. These deity figures. They're also called Elohim. They're not at the level of the God of Israel for the biblical writer. They're not thinking attributes when they write the word Elohim. The Shadim, Deuteronomy 32:17. If we could click out to this. Now, in your English Bibles, this typically gets translated. It's over here in the NLT. Let me enlarge this just a bit so you can read it. They offered sacrifices, it's a reference to the Israelites, to demons. This is the word shadim. These are not the demons of the Gospels. By the way, we're going to get into this later today. We're used to thinking of good guys, angels, bad guys, demons. That is really, really oversimplistic. Okay, there are different groups of bad guys. They are not all the same, and they don't derive from the same source or event either. But in this case, the shadim, it's an Akkadian term that refers to a territorial entity. They are referred to as gods. They offered sacrifices to the shadim, which are not God, no kidding, to gods they had not known. If we click on the word gods, again, you'll see that we have Elohim. So here we have, again, clearly lesser beings referred to by Elohim. 1 Samuel 28:13, I'll just run through this one without clicking out. This is the account of Saul going to the medium, it's often translated witch, at Endor to get information. The medium at Endor. So Saul shows up at her house. He has previously run out all the mediums and the necromancers and all the occult figures out of Judah, but he somehow knows where to find this one. So Samuel has died, and Saul's in trouble, and God will not answer his prayers. And so he says, I need information from the supernatural world. So he goes to this woman's house. She doesn't know who he is. She finds out fairly quickly. I'm going to click out anyway. It's kind of an interesting passage. So let's go down here just a bit. So the woman says, who shall I bring up for you? He said, bring up Samuel for me. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice. It freaks her out. And the woman said to Saul, why have you deceived me? You are Saul. So something about being actually able to get Samuel, as opposed to hoodwinking this guy, or getting to some other evil spirit, maybe that she's used to. She knows, I got Samuel here, and that means I'm in heap big trouble. Because this is Saul. This is who Samuel would talk to about the things of God. And then the king says to her, do not be afraid. What do you see? And the woman said to Saul, I see a God coming up out of the earth. The word there is Elohim. The disembodied dead are referred to as Elohim. Now again, if this is about attributes, that's ridiculous. Okay, an Israelite's dead aunt or deceased child or grandpa or grandma, they are not at the level of the God of Israel. They just aren't. It has nothing to do with a specific set of unique attributes. So, what does it mean? Biblical writers would use Elohim as a word to denote and describe a member of the disembodied spiritual world. That's all it is. It has nothing to do with attributes. Yahweh is an Elohim. And there are lots of Elohim because there are lots of spirit beings in the spiritual world. But no other Elohim is Yahweh. And you don't get that theology from the word Elohim. Where you get it is you read the text carefully and you realize this particular Elohim is described in ways that no other Elohim ever are described. This one is the creator, not only of all of our physical world, the embodied world, but he's the creator of them, the other Elohim. He is sovereign. He is omniscient. He is omnipotent. Not only do the biblical writers never describe any other Elohim in those terms, but they specifically deny those attributes to other Elohim. All an Elohim is a spirit being. Yahweh is an Elohim. No other Elohim is Yahweh. He is, I like to say, species unique. There's only one of those. But they're all Elohim because they're all part of the spiritual world. The disembodied human dead are Elohim. Why? Because they're no longer embodied. They are now in the afterlife. They're in the spiritual world. It's not a really hard concept, but it's hard for us because we never have this discussion. We avoid passages like Psalm 82, or we make up stuff about them and say, well, that's just a bunch of Jewish guys. There's nothing to see here, citizen. Move along. And there are lots of passages like this. Now, I talked about hierarchy a little bit earlier. In the ancient Near Eastern conception of the divine, the supernatural bureaucracy, there are always tiers. In the Israelite version of this, the tiers are as follows. And you're going to see this graphic at the end of the day, and it's going to kind of shock you because it'll have a different context for our discussion. But at the top is Yahweh. Yahweh is more than one person at the same time. Now, today we're not going to go through the Old Testament evidence. My dissertation was actually included God as man in the Old Testament, the idea of a Godhead in the Old Testament. That's where Trinitarian thinking comes from, a Godhead idea. It begins in the Old Testament. So we have Yahweh as a Godhead at the top. The middle tier are the sons of God. This is not an ontological term. It doesn't tell you what a thing is. It tells you what a thing does, what their role is. I have a book out on angels. I don't know if your resource center has this one. But we have another problem with the way we think about the supernatural world, and that is our vocabulary. Vocabulary works this way. If you're an English major or semantics, or you had a good high school English teacher, you know about semantics. It's word meaning. Words never have just one meaning. They denote different things. So there are terms that describe the members of the heavenly host in terms of what they are by nature. That's our fancy word ontology, what a thing is. And these are terms like Elohim, Ruchot, spirits. Okay, it just tells you what it is. And then there are terms that describe rank in hierarchy. Sons of God is probably the leading one for this because in royal bureaucracy of the ancient Near Eastern world, who got the most important positions? Typically family members. There was wisdom in that because they're family, they'll do a good job, and their family, I keep my eye on them. Okay? There was an upper elite that often included family members. They get the really big administrative jobs. And then you have essentially like a bureaucratic staff that are essential to preventing chaos in an administration. In fact, because there's more of these, they're probably, some of the most important. They are described with terms that describe the specific things they do. Angel is one of those terms. In Hebrew, it's malach. In Greek, it's angelos. It means messenger. It describes a task. What angel is essentially a job description. Any given spirit being might take a message. When he takes the message, he's performing the task of a malach, of an angel, because it describes a task. Now, I'm going to give you a little heads up here. This is just to little whet the appetite. Sons of God in the Old Testament and words like holy ones are overwhelmingly, in fact, almost exclusively used of members of the spiritual world. That is not true in the New Testament. They're the holy ones, and the sons of God are you. This is why Paul, in 1 Corinthians 6, when he's trying to get the Corinthians to stop fighting with each other, it's a really obscure passage. He says, look, why are you taking each other to court all the time? Don't you know that you're going to judge angels? You could also translate the verb there, rule over. Don't you know that you outrank them? If you look at the hierarchy, we're the children of God. In the next world, in the new Eden, we outrank them. The vocabulary is transferred from the supernatural world to us. I often get asked, why should I care about angelology, the supernatural world? Because the way God, and we're going to go through a lot of this today, the way God looks at his heavenly family, his heavenly host, his heavenly children, his heavenly bureaucracy, if you will, the way God looks at them and the way he involves them in what he does, is a template for how God looks at you, how God looks at us, and how God looks at us as partners. Family and partnership, identity and mission. The supernatural realm is a template for our realm. But we typically avoid angelology like the plague, or we just say wacky stuff. It's a neglected area of serious biblical study. But we're going to see this again. Now, I often get questions, specific questions. I'll go through these quickly. This won't take too long. We'll finish on time. People often ask, well, what about those Bible verses that say there's none besides me? There's none like me. These are phrases that are not denying the existence of other Elohim, because there are verses that affirm the existence of Elohim. So unless you love a hopelessly contradictory Bible, okay, we need to adjust our thinking. These are not statements of denial of existence. They are statements of incomparability. And that's easy to demonstrate. I mean, we could take a tour through Deuteronomy. We don't have time for that. But if you look at Deuteronomy 4:35, there's one of these statements. Besides me, there's no God. There's actually 11 variations to this, all kind of similar, but expressing the same thought. There's none besides me. Well, if you looked at Deuteronomy 4:19 and 20, Deuteronomy 17, Deuteronomy 29, all the way up to Deuteronomy 32:17, which we just looked at a few moments ago, you will see that elsewhere in Deuteronomy, the reality of other Elohim is affirmed. Okay, you don't have 4 or 5 affirmations, and then verse 35, we have a contradiction. All that it's saying is there's a lot of Elohim. Yahweh's among them, but none of them are like him. He's unique. That's all it is. So, these statements are not an obstacle to what I'm saying. This is my favorite illustration of this, and I'm not going to click out to save time here. But there are 2 occasions, Isaiah 47, and yes, believe it or not, the book of Zephaniah is good for something, okay? So Zephaniah 2:15, poor minor prophets, man. They just, okay. These phrases occur in these passages. In Isaiah 47, it's the city of Babylon saying, there's none besides me. What? Babylon thinks that she's the only city that exists? She's denying the existence of all other cities? That's ridiculous. The prophet wouldn't say that either, because the prophet's not a dunderhead, okay? In Zephaniah, it's Nineveh, the capital of Assyria. Different context. This is where he's doing his ministry. Nineveh says, there's none besides me. They're not saying, I'm the only city on the planet. All the other cities aren't real. No, it's saying, we're the best. We're incomparable. That's all it is. FAQ number 2, why does God need a council? We looked at 1 Kings 22. We looked at Daniel 7. I will click out to Daniel 4. It's kind of an interesting passage. This is Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, remember Nebuchadnezzar has this dream, and he sees a watcher that is a holy one, here in verse 13, comes down from heaven, and they're going to talk about his dream. And essentially the holy one, the watcher, says, hey, I sure hope you like to eat grass, because that's going to be your diet for a while. You're going to be driven insane. You're going to be temporarily insane as a judgment from God because of your hubris and your pride. And look at what he says here. You go down to verse 17. He says, the sentence upon Nebuchadnezzar is by decree of the watchers, plural. The word of the holy ones. This decision is according to the word of the holy ones, plural. But a few verses later, we see, scroll down here. Come on. Keep going. Let me go back here. 24. This is the interpretation, O king. It is a decree of the Most High. There's only one of those. So the same sentence, the same judgment on Nebuchadnezzar is decreed by a group and by the Most High. This is participation. God allows them to participate. You say, well, why does God need a council? The answer is, he doesn't. He just likes to do stuff like this. He likes to create beings who are like him and let them partner with him. God doesn't need anything. When I get this question, I like to flip it around and say, why does God need you? Why does God need the church? I mean, couldn't God just decide who's going to be a believer and, we'll call it good now. I mean, I'm just tired of waiting for the Great Commission. I mean, good grief, look what time it is here. Can't he do that? Why did God have to give the Great Commission? No. God could just make all these decisions himself. But he doesn't do that. He likes the family business. Okay? That's what he wants. He wants children who are part of the family business. He's got supernatural children who work with him in that realm. He's got believers, human children of God in this realm who help him do what he wants done here. He doesn't need anything. What about Jesus? How can he be the Son of God if other divine sons of God are real? Again, it sounds like a difficult question, but it's a really easy question. John 3:16, you probably all know this verse. For God so loved the world that he gave his... See, only begotten is what a lot of translations have. Only begotten Son. Some have a better translation I'll get to in a moment. The Greek word there is monogenes. Now, in the old days of biblical scholarship, which was the first half of the 20th century backward, scholars thought that monogenes was composed of two Greek words. Monos, which means one or only. Mono, again, we can see that pretty easily. And then the second half they thought was from a verb, genao, to mean beget, like in having children. Monogenes, only begotten. That's actually where the translation comes from. Second half of the 20th century, that changed because there was more Greek material of the same Greek dialect as the New Testament, the Koine Greek. Actually, thousands and thousands, of lines worth of new material. And scholars were able to determine that, we were wrong about that. Monogenes actually comes from monos and gene, which means kind, one of a kind. Unique. This is why some of your more recent translations will translate that term as unique or something like that. And the really good sort of test case for that is Hebrews 11:17. This is the Hebrews 11, the Hall of Faith chapter. You get to Abraham, and it says this: By faith Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son. Okay, Bible trivia time. Was Isaac Abraham's only son? No. He wasn't even the firstborn, generally speaking. You had Ishmael. Ishmael was the son of Abraham by Hagar. So that tells you that the monogenes here, again, only son. Let's just open up our interlinear pane. Click on only, monogenes. It can't mean the only one that exists. It does mean unique. What was unique about Isaac? He's Sarah's boy, who could not have children. He is the son of the promise. That's why he's monogenes. And that's why Jesus is monogenes. He is unique. What makes Jesus unique among all other heavenly beings? He is Yahweh, who is unique. And that's actually why, we're not going to go into John chapter 10, but that's actually why Jesus quotes Psalm 82, verse 6 in John 10 to defend his deity. He's saying, look, fellas, doesn't your own scripture say, have God speaking to other sons of God? His point is that, there are other sons of God out there who are not human. They're supernatural. That's point number one, dudes. Okay, so when I say I'm more than a man, your own scripture says that category exists. So don't tell me it doesn't. And then he had just said, I and the Father are one. So I'm not only like a member of the council in the supernatural world, I'm the Lord of the council. Okay, I am him. And he follows that in verses 37, 38 by saying, the Father is in me and I'm in the Father. That's why he quotes it. Just to stick it to him. I like when Jesus sticks it to him. Significance, this is our last slide for this session. What I want you to take away from this, again, think of the template. The way God looks at his supernatural family and his partnership relationship with them is the way he looks at you. Because his supernatural family, do you realize this, existed before human creation. Okay, we're going to look at that in the next session, but in Job 38, the sons of God were witnesses when God laid the foundations of the world, and then God goes on to create humankind. He already has a family. God already has kids. okay, before we get to Adam and Eve. And his relationship with them and his partnership with them are going to serve as a template for what he wants on earth. What God wanted on earth. Now, by the way, I have a new little book I self-published. You can get it on Amazon. What did God want? And part of this content today is going to be in there. But that book is for the new believer. So if you follow my work, you kind of know the drill already here. But the academic book about the stuff we're talking about today is the unseen realm. If you're an academic person, you like to read books with footnotes, you like to do research, you like primary sources, you like to chase the bunny trails back into scholarship, that's the book for you, trust me. That book took 15 years to put together. Okay? It is abundantly footnoted. It has a companion website with more data and more information, more sources. I have collected a bibliography that I can't make it accessible to the public, but I do send people things occasionally when they need to do research and they can't get to it. All the best stuff is not available free on the internet. If you live near a college or a seminary library, you can get access to peer-reviewed research journal articles through JSTOR and the ATLA Religion Database. But some people don't have that, so I've collected things. I have almost 6,000 resources, peer-reviewed resources on all the content of Unseen Realm. Okay, I'm not making anything up. Okay, the dirty little secret of Unseen Realm and the work I do is that Mike never had an original thought. Okay, everything is peer-reviewed. What I do is I connect dots. I'm a synthesizer. And hopefully someone who is, my ministry, if I can use that word for what I do, is to take peer-reviewed scholarship and make it decipherable to people who won't go out and get degrees. Just anybody who cares, okay, about the biblical text. I want to try to make that comprehensible and decipherable. That's why we do our podcast. That's why we do the books. So the big one's Unseen Realm. Supernatural, which Stovall has been kind enough to purchase a number of those for people. That is a distillation of Unseen Realm. That's the light version. In that, there's no footnotes. There's no academic argumentation. It's not in the dialect of academies, that kind of thing. I had a good editor for Unseen Realm. Just go up at Amazon, look at the reviews. I've got almost 900 reviews. It's readable, even though it's an academic book. But if you don't like reading books with footnotes, get Supernatural. What does God want is for the new believer to sort of prepare them for Supernatural and then for the next one. And the other books are sort of drill downs. And Carrie and Stovall were nice enough to proof what does God want and made a lot of content improvements to that. So just be aware of it. But a number of the things that we're going to talk about here, you'll get a little taste of in that. Or again, if you're a new believer, if you know someone who's searching, that would be a good book for them. So what did God want? The short answer is an earthly family with him forever. It's a real simple statement, real simple recipe. God created humanity because they otherwise wouldn't exist, obviously. He didn't create humanity because there was some deficiency in himself. He wanted, just like he has in the supernatural world, he wanted beings in the embodied world, the human world, and he makes the world for these beings. He wants something like him to participate with him on earth, to both enjoy the creation, to steward it, to make the rest of the world like Eden. He gives them tasks. It's for their enjoyment and his pleasure. That's the original vision. He has to do it because that's the only way it's going to happen. So let's talk a little bit about Eden. Eden was more than a garden. Again, if you read Unseen Realm or Supernatural, you're going to get a little bit of a discussion in Supernatural on some curiosities about Eden. And they're actually important. Eden is more than a garden. It's God's earthly home. It is superior to the rest of the earth. See, we grew up, I did, as a Christian. I became a Christian when I was a teenager, thinking that Eden is like the whole created world. It's not. Eden was a little tiny piece, little tiny place in the created world. How do we know that? Because Genesis 2 gives us specific geography for it. When God creates humanity, he tasks them with going out and subduing, stewarding the earth. Okay, if it's a perfect environment, it doesn't need that. But it's something lesser than what Eden is. Eden is where God himself dwells. There is perfection there. The source of life is God. These sorts of big ideas. So humans are tasked to multiply, because you're going to need more than just you two, okay, to pull this off. But you essentially are supposed to make the rest of the world like this place, to spread the good rule of God everywhere, to multiply what it's like everywhere to be in the presence of God. Life as it was meant to be. Eden is also called a mountain. Ezekiel 28, we might as well click out there. A lot of people, this is easy to read over, this verse, but Eden isn't just a garden. Yes, in verse 13, Eden, the garden of God. Down in verse 14, God is talking about this cherub figure, and he says, I placed you, you were on the holy mountain of God. Why is Eden described as a garden and a mountain? Is God confused? Is the writer confused? No. Gardens and mountains in ancient Near Eastern thought were the way you would describe the most wonderful environment, and also the most remote environment, because God is not like us. He's not us. He's completely other. This is why, again, across the board in ancient Near Eastern thinking, the gods live in paradise. Think about who's writing the Bible. This is a subsistence economy, ancient Israel, patriarchs, nomadic lifestyle. Maybe you have some settled, urban situations, but people are living day to day, hand to mouth. Unless you're the king or something like that, then you have a little bit better, but it's still a struggle. Well, surely the gods live in a better place than this. They do. It's a paradise. There's always enough water. There's always enough food. It's just wonderful. But they were also thought of as living on mountains because they're other than us. And in the ancient Near Eastern world, the gods really don't want to have much to do with people. They're just kind of icky. They get in the way, they're irritating, they snore, they make too much noise, all sorts of complaints about humans. So the gods are somewhere else, or they're in heaven, because we don't live there. If you make a careful study of ancient Near Eastern thinking, the gods are in places humans don't live. Heavens, the seas. If you've seen it, Aquaman, okay. All right. These are places that are not for human habitation. Humans are cut off from living there. Okay, this is why Eden is described in these terms. It's a paradise, but it's also other. But God creates humans and puts them in this garden. It was where he was, and so where he is, his family is. We've alluded to Job 38. God's audience are the kids he already has in the supernatural world. They watch him create. And they are the audience for a momentous decision. After God lays the foundations of the world and the sons of God in Job 38 shout for joy, God has something else to tell them. And this gets us into the famous image of God passage, Genesis 1, 26 and 27. Then God said, let us make man in our image. It's Adam, humankind, is a better translation. Let us make Adam, humankind, in our image, in our likeness. Let them rule. So again, it's plural. Over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, the livestock, over all the earth, over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. So it's comprehensive. It's mankind. It's humankind, male and female. Have you ever noticed there's some strange things in this passage? If you haven't, maybe you will now, because I changed the colors of some of the words. Isn't that clever? Let us make humankind in our image. You have plurals. And then in the next verse, it switches back to singulars. Is the writer confused? Did he just flunk grammar? Now, I would suggest to you there's a point to doing that. We want to talk about that. There's lots of debate on the nature of the image. There's lots of debate on the plurals. The switch, you almost never hear commented on. But we're going to go through all of them. Most Christians are taught that the us in the verse is the Trinity. There are a number of reasons, and I go through all of them in Unseen Realm, why that is a flawed idea. I'll just give you one. The Trinity, in any standard formulation or articulation of the doctrine, you have three co-equal, co-eternal, co-omniscient persons. They don't need information. So when God says, hey, let's make the other person in the Trinity, stop, I'm already there. And he can't say, I thought of that before you did, because they're co-eternal. Okay, so why do we even need the conversation? Because we're not dealing with the Trinity. Okay, God is speaking to his heavenly host, the family that already exists, and he says, I got a great idea. Let's create beings who are like us on the earth. Let's take, we got this neat family here, and I love it. Love you guys. And I'd like to do it again. On this time, they're going to be a little weird because they're going to have bodies. That's a little strange, a little restricted, some limitations there. But let's do that. Now, we know, and I'll probably click out to a little bit later, that because it switches back to the singular, when God does create humanity, he is the lone creator. There are no other creators. But the plural is still there for a reason, and we'll talk about that. I want to take a bit of a rabbit trail, though, and talk about what the image is, because this is something that Stovall and I have had a number of conversations about. This is really important. And it's something that if we get a grasp of this, it will inform our identity, and not just our individual identity, but our collective identity in ways that might seem to the ear obvious, but in our culture are anything but obvious. The image of God has these characteristics in Scripture. Male and female possess it equally. It makes us distinct from all other earthly creatures. There's no hint in the text that we get it in stages, incrementally or partially. You either have it or you don't. There's no growth and development into the image in a human sense here in the creation. And it's passed on generationally. When Adam and Eve have children in Genesis 5, their children are said to be in the image, of their father, the image of Adam, his own image. In Genesis 9, that language is applied to every human being. Whosoever sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God he made man, he made humanity. And that's long after Adam and Eve. You've got lots and lots of people on the earth by the time that statement is made. They are all imagers of God. Ooh, I said imagers. What do you mean, Mike? That's kind of an awkward term. It's actually important. Now, I'm going to put that up. A little rabbit trail here, a little story. I used to teach Christian ethics I did it at a Bible college and at a Christian college, which happened to be a Catholic school in Wisconsin. And I loved Abortion Day. This gives you a little insight into my personality. You say, well, how in the world could you love Abortion Day? Because I knew I would get to torment students on that day like I don't get to torment them on any other day. So what I would do is I'd go in and I'd say, hey, it's Abortion Day today. We're going to talk about abortion, Christian ethics. How many of you, and again, these are Christian schools, so I'd say, how many of you are pro-life? Like every hand goes up, which of course is predictable. And I would say, why? And they would, they'd look at you again like you got two heads. We're Christians, and they'd go back and forth. And eventually somebody would say, well, life is sacred. And I'd say, why? And then somebody would wind up in Genesis 1:26, and they'd say, well, because humanity is made in the image of God. And I would say, well, what does that mean? And then I would get the grocery list. See, that's what I'm waiting for, is the grocery list. If you read a lot of your theologians, what I'm going to tell you is my view, is not a new view. It's, again, Mike never had an original idea. But there are good exegetical reasons for it. But this is the grocery list. They would say things like, consciousness, self-awareness, sentience, the ability to pray, the ability to commune with God, emotions, having a soul or a spirit. Theologians land somewhere in here. And I would say, well, thank you for making a biblical pro-choice argument for me. And then they'd really look at you. And they're like, what? What do you mean? They'd be like my pug, like, what? Okay. Why do these things fail? Because they cannot be said to be present equally among all human beings. You go back to the list. Does everybody have the same level of intelligence, emotional aptitude? Is everybody's conscience the same? What about people in a coma? Do they lose the image? They're no longer conscious. I mean, you can just go down, you can pick off every one of these. If we even expand it to the animal kingdom, there's a whole field in psychology called animal cognition, which is actually fun to read. It's something I'm interested in, not because I have pugs. I don't know where pugs rank on this. But I remember reading a study one time where chickens scored better than toddlers on an intelligence test. And we have a chicken at home. Why do we have a chicken? I don't know. Okay. But if you let the chicken out, it knows at night to go roost somewhere, where it's safe. Like it'll go back home. You want to do that with your toddler? Okay. That was the test. So animal intelligence, I mean, none of these work. They're not possessed equally among all humans. They can't be said to be actually present among all humans at different stages of human development, and some aren't even unique to mankind. All these are connected to brain function, except for soul and spirit. We'll get to that in a moment. But you see what I mean? The little, 4-6-celled zygote, the thing that attaches itself to the wall of the uterus, that ain't praying to God. That's not having a single thought. It doesn't have a brain. It's not communing with the supernatural, with the Almighty. And then somebody in the audience in my ethics class would say, well, it will. I said, thank you. Now we have potential persons. That's a pro-choice argument. And then you'd get, I'm going to tell my pastor. After this class, I'm going to call my mom. I'm going to go to the dean. And it's like, look, they know what day it is. They're expecting you. Just go ahead. This is every semester. Okay, they get it. And I would tell them, look, I'm doing this to you because I don't want someone who is hostile to your faith to do it to you, because they will destroy you. Okay? It would take 5 minutes to destroy you. And some would enjoy it. I mean, these ideas make you vulnerable. What about soul and spirit? Well, the Hebrew word for soul is nephesh. Guess what? Animals have that in Genesis 2:7. So that's not unique to humans. Genesis 1:21, another verse. Animals have that. Every living creature, nephesh hachaya, living creature. See, it's obscured in your English translations. You don't know that's the word for soul, but it is. They also have a ruach, the word for spirit. Ecclesiastes 3:21, it just refers to animate life. There's animate life, and then there's like plant life, okay? Man, what about the nishmat chayim, the breath of life? Well, that's nice. Genesis 7:22 and 23 attributes that to all land animals as well. Again, it would take 5 minutes. So what is, inevitably I'd get, okay, smart guy, what is it? They get angry. And I'd say, I'm glad you asked the question, because it's important. So God created man in his own image, is how most translations have this. I'm going to suggest that we need to think of the image as a function or role rather than a quality or attribute inside a person. Because those qualities and attributes are not unique. Humans don't possess them equally. And in some cases, they can be perceived as being even lost, again, like the coma situation. The image is something that's a function. Let me illustrate in English. If I say, believe it or not, this is really about that little preposition in. In Hebrew, it's be, the letter bet. Bet salem, in the image, okay? If I say, put the dishes in the sink, the word in denotes what? Location. It's in the sink. If I say, I wrote the letter in pencil, now I'm not talking about location. I'm not using that little preposition to denote location. I'm talking about the instrument I used to do some writing, the tool. It has a totally different semantic, totally different meaning. If I say, I broke the vase in pieces, I'm not talking about instrument now or location. I'm talking about some result of some action that I did. Okay, try this one. If I say, I work in medicine, I work in ministry, I work in accounting, I work in education, what do I mean? It means I work as a doctor, a PA, a nurse. I work as a pastor. somebody, a staff person, some ministerial function of any kind, any type. I work as an accountant. I work as a principal, a teacher, an administrator, whatever. It describes function or role. That is what Genesis 1:26 is getting at. Now, I could take you into the Hebrew grammar and talk about the bet of predication, the bet essentia, and all that fancy Latin grammar stuff. This is a known category for the meaning of in, function. How does it work out practically? Try to think of it as a verb rather than a noun. Every human being is an imager of God. God's original intent was to create creatures like him, to essentially be him as if he were there. They are his proxy. They are his representative, his agent to do things. Every human being is an imager of God. Another way to illustrate this is to go to one of the 10 Commandments. This is a familiar one. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Now, we are sort of taught to think that this commandment is about swearing, the verbal utterance of God's name in some defamatory or, useless way. I want you to see something, again, that's obscured in English. Take is the Hebrew verb nasa. And I'm going to just bear with me here, I'm going to run a quick search just to show you a point. This is often the term, you'll look at the options over here, that is translated to bear, to carry, to support, to lift. Okay, it's a verb that means all those things. Lift, carry, take up, pick up, that sort of thing, to bear. Thou shalt not bear the name of the Lord thy God in vain. What does it mean to bear a name? It means to be associated with it. I bear the name Christian. I bear the name, like Logos employee. I am an extension of that name. I'm responsible for its reputation. Okay? To bear the name means to be a representative of that name. But the New Testament expresses this really nicely when Paul tells Peter, let everyone who names the name of Christ depart from iniquity. Imaging God and bearing the name are two related concepts. It's really two ways of saying the same thing. Humanity was the representative of God, was the agent of God on earth. To be human is to be the image of God. It doesn't matter if you're a few cells in a woman's womb. It doesn't matter if you're old and you've lost your memory. It doesn't matter if you're in a coma. If you are human, you are God's imager. End of story. It doesn't matter what race, what income level. Look at all the ways our culture divides people up into groups. We live in a day when the best word for it is tribalism. It's like we all want to be in these little tribes and then they fight with each other constantly. That is so chaotically contrary to God's vision for humanity and the fact that God actually tells you how he looks at people. Every person God looks at as his representation. They are him, as it were, on earth. Now that gets ruined by the fall. We enter into rebellion. We have the problem of sin. We are all in rebellion, and we need to be brought back into the family of God where we can actually function like God wants us to do, and we can actually represent him well, the way he wants things done. But every person you bump into is a potential candidate. Not candidate's not a really good word, but every person you bump into is an estranged family member who was created for a specific reason, and that is to image God, to participate with God, to complete the tasks God wants, to give the earth the kind of life God wants people to have. It all goes back to Genesis 1, to this concept of imaging. Bearing the name, representation. Again, in a fallen world, the redeemed are the ones who can do this as intended, and we're all estranged from God. Thankfully, we have a template. It's no coincidence that imaging language is used of Jesus. Again, it's not like a lucky correlation. Oh, Paul got lucky. He used the word image a few times. I bet he wasn't thinking about Genesis 1. I bet he was. I bet he was thinking about representation of God. The God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. He's the perfect image. He is the perfect representative. If you've seen me, Jesus said, you have seen the Father. God has predestinated that all who believe will ultimately be conformed to the image of his Son. Does that mean we all look like Jesus? It'd be kind of sad if you're a woman, just like, I like the way I look, Again, look at how we think of this stuff. I'll be at my ideal weight. I'll have more hair, Can we not literalize everything so often? There's just bigger stuff going on. In 1 John 3, it says, "Behold what manner of love the Father has bestowed upon us, that we should be called, and we should be the children of God." And then John has this little, you look it up, he has this little parenthetical thought where he says, and that's what we are. And then he goes on and says, someday we will be like him. We will be conformed to his image. Believers have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge after the image of its creator. What a coincidence. We all, with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. To image God is to become more like him. To use Jesus as your example. You follow Jesus, you imitate Jesus. Folks, this is discipleship, which is something that's basically lost in the modern church, okay? This is discipleship. You follow Jesus, you mimic him, his behavior, his attitudes, what he would do. And he gives us plenty of examples. And when you do that, you are being conformed to his image, and he is the perfect image of God. You are fulfilling your role. This is what you were intended to be. It's what every person was intended to be. All in the same family, again, all participating with God in making the world the way God wanted it to be in the first place. That's the task. And we've quoted 2 Timothy 2:19 already. So what about the plurals? Again, I don't think this is a conundrum. Let's start with what's clear. God is the lone creator of all things in heaven and earth, visible and invisible. Earthly world, spiritual world. Colossians 1 tells us that. We image God, our creator. That is, we serve, we partner with him as his agents, his representatives, his proxies in our sphere, which is this world. They do the same thing in their world. They have the same Father, the same Creator. The reason it's plural is because it loops them into the conversation. His supernatural children, the members of his host, the council, whatever, again, metaphor you want, they image God, their Creator, in the spiritual realm. We are to be mirror images, pardon the pun, it's deliberate in this case. We are mirror images of each other, as in heaven, so on earth. Okay? It's, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. God has two families. In Eden, because heaven came to earth. You realize, again, that's what Eden is. This is where heaven comes to earth. God dwells among men. He creates a human family to coexist and co-partner with the supernatural family that already exists. Where God is, his family, his entourage is with them. He has a conversation with them. And it's not the only time when he says, hey, let us do this or that. God has conversations with the members of the host in other places, in Genesis, in Eden. They're there, we're there. God's original plan was to have these two families together. You realize what that means? It means humanity was created to be fit for God's presence. That's the original plan. They're not barred from entry. They belong there. The most normal thing in God's mind is for humans to be with him because his other children are with him. He didn't create them to be separate. He created them to be one. This is why at the end of the road in sanctification, long, fancy theological term for when we're glorified after death or after the Lord comes, we become like him, like Jesus. We don't merely become like angels. And we learn why in Hebrews 2, because the second person of the Godhead became a man to redeem man. So we are actually made like him, a little bit above them, a little bit above the angels. But we are there together in the new earth. You realize the Bible ends in Revelation the way it began in Genesis. It's just a new Eden, and now it's global. But everybody who's there belongs there. It's the most normal thing to think in God's mind. The most abnormal thing for God to think is that his family is estranged from him. Both his supernatural family members rebel, and his human family members rebel. They turn their backs on the things God wants them to have because they want autonomy. They want control. They want self-rule. They want it so badly that they're willing to throw away all that they have to think they're in control of their own lives, their own situations. They make their own autonomous decisions. That's abnormal in God's mind. That's what he doesn't want. Again, the plural's co-representation is the key idea. Let's talk a little bit about rebellion and evil. Now, whenever I jump into this, the question naturally comes up, well, didn't God know that was going to happen? Of course God knew that was going to happen. He's an omniscient being. Of course he knows what's going to happen. Well, then why did he do it? Why did he make us? It's a related question is, why is there evil? Can't God just get rid of evil? If he doesn't get rid of evil, he can't be good. You know why God doesn't get rid of evil? How many of you are X-Files fans? This is going to date me a little bit. Okay. There's this wonderful episode in the X-Files where Mulder and Scully find a genie, rolled up in the carpet, okay? And Mulder figures out, this is a genie, like in Aladdin. And so the genie says, well, congratulations, numbskull, you get 3 wishes, okay? And so his first wish, it's the caricature wish. I want world peace. And then Mulder goes outside of the room that they're in, and everybody's gone. And he's running down the street, Scully, surely Scully's here. It's like, nope. Got any more wishes? So it's a good illustration. Yes, God could wipe out evil like that. But to do it, he has to wipe out all the beings he has made who are like him. Because when we're created as God's imagers, and when they were created as God's imagers, they're co-imagers just in different realms, they are his representatives. Well, to do the job of sort of being God, being a partner with God, to do that job, God shared his attributes with us. In theology, they're called communicable attributes. That's your impressive theological term for the day. Okay? They're attributes God shares: creativity, intelligence, rationality, emotions, and freedom, free will. You can't eliminate that one and keep the rest of them, because then you wouldn't really be like God, would you? Free will is actually essential to imaging, to the whole concept. Now, God knew that, I still think this is a really good idea, because it's what I want. I see the end goal. I want a human family, an earthly family with my supernatural family. I want them together. I want to enjoy them partnering with me in their realm like I enjoy you partnering with me in the supernatural realm. I want a family. It's the natural impulse of God to want a family and to want partners. But I know that when I make them as my imagers and I share my attributes, I also am aware of one other thing. They're not me. They're like me, but they're not me. That means they lack my perfect nature. That means at some point, they're going to abuse the good gifts that I've given them. And God's right. Rebellion happens in the supernatural realm, and it happens in the earthly realm. Now, what does it tell you about God, though? You say, well, that's not very satisfying because look at all the misery, look at all the violence, look at all the bad stuff in the earth, and we look at all the suffering. Since we know that wasn't what God intended, God hates it too. But here's the key point. In God's mind, and you can blame God for this decision if you like, in God's mind, the terrible things that would result from his initial decision to make us was better than not having us at all. At the end of the day, God makes that call. Now, you can sit there and be the proud atheist and say, well, I would rather not exist. Yeah. Well, then why don't you just go out and jump off a bridge then? Show us the commitment to your own statement. Here's a truck coming by, let's have it, okay? They're lying to you. They're just trying to win a debate. Okay? We have to have, we want life. Life is a wonderful thing. And even with suffering, some of the people who suffer the most will tell you that life is a wonderful thing because they kind of know, from one end to the other. And, we have to come to grips with suffering. That's why we were created to be family, to be community, to alleviate the suffering of family members, to alleviate the suffering of other imagers of God. If you looked at people this way, you might actually get off your butt and do something, okay? Let's be honest. I often compare, and you all know the difference here. And again, I'm going to be critical of just church in general. Again, not every place I've been in church, it hasn't been this experience, but I've seen it. A lot of churches tend to treat people, and even a lot of small groups, a lot of Christians, tend to treat the collective like it's a business instead of a family. You would think differently if you had some person in church come up to you and say, I can't pay my rent this month. I don't know what I'm going to do. If that was your brother, you'd know what to do. Okay? If that was your sister, you wouldn't even have to think twice about it. It's a whole different mental dynamic. Okay, that is how God looks at us. That's the kind of thing God has as an expectation. If we will get it into our heads, again, if we would think of ourselves the way God thinks of us, okay, as humans, and especially within the church, because we're no longer estranged, we are redeemed, we are brought back into the family, we have the Holy Spirit to assist us, we have other people who are like-minded. This should be the most normal thing in the world. And if it actually happened, and when it happens, because it does happen, if it actually happened with frequency, do you think people would notice? Of course they notice, because it's abnormal. Okay, it's not the norm. It gives you a little taste of what life should be like, again, in God's world. It all goes back to this imaging concept. And yes, there's evil and there's suffering, but again, God was willing to be grieved himself. You think you're grieved about suffering because of the stuff you see in the world? God sees everything. Okay, you don't have anything up on God. You don't have a greater awareness of the misery and the suffering of the world than God does. He is fully aware. This is why Scripture, God hates evil. It grieves him. Now, did he know it was going to happen? Yeah, he did. But that was preferable than never having us at all. That is just God's nature. Now, God is actively trying, working with people, through people, to be his agents. Again, and it's the redeemed that can function in this way, the way that it was all intended to work. God is actively engaged with people to bring estranged imagers back into the family. We call that evangelism, okay, giving them the gospel. And then building a community where suffering is alleviated. It's never going to be totally removed because that's the age to come. But in this age, we have to try to address it. Again, this is what God wants. Now, the question that goes with this is, you inevitably wind up in this predestination, conversation. Let me just click out to a verse, because I think this one's really important too. Yeah, God knew what was going to happen. Well, then if he foreknew it, this is what God wants. He predestinated it. He wants suffering. He's corrupt. He's evil. He's this, that, and the other thing. Well, really? I think you're making some assumptions there. And I love to go to this passage. It's not the only one of its kind, but I think it's the clearest. This is David at Keilah. And you say, good grief. I know who David is, but Keilah, I'm probably going to forget that name. It's okay. Just remember the story. David is fleeing from Saul, like he does most of the time, okay, until he becomes king. Let me just read through the passage. Now they told David, somebody tells David, behold, the Philistines, who I like to characterize as the Klingons of the Old Testament, okay, The Philistines are fighting against Keilah and are robbing the threshing floors. That's where they store food. That's bad because people like to eat. At least I do. Therefore, David inquired of the Lord, should I go up and attack these Philistines? And the Lord said to David, go and attack the Philistines and save Keilah. But David's men said to him, behold, we're afraid here in Judah. I mean, how much more than if we go to Keilah against the armies of the Philistines? So they're safe in Judah. They're holed up. They're away from Saul's gang. They're a small group. Saul has a whole army. If they leave the relative safety of where they're at and they go up to the Philistines, then they're kind of exposed. Plus, it's the Philistines. They're just nasty. So David says, well, let me go ask God again. David inquired of the Lord again, and the Lord answered him, get up, arise, go down to Keilah, for I will give the Philistines into your hand. Translation, just tell your men not to worry. Okay? David and his men went to Keilah and fought with the Philistines and brought away their livestock and struck them with a great blow. So David saved the inhabitants of Keilah. David's the hero. He saves the city. When Abiathar, the son of Ahimelech, had fled to David to Keilah, so this is another character in the bigger story of David, he hears that David's going to Keilah, so he wants to go down and talk there. He had come down with an ephod in his hand. This is probably part of the breastplate of the high priest. Again, this is after the Mosaic era. But it's one of the things that God had told them to use to ask questions of God, to inquire of God. So the priest comes down. It was told Saul that David had come to Keilah. So not only does Ahimelech hear, but Saul hears that David is in Keilah. We don't know how he heard, but he gets wind of this. And Saul's like, oh, this is awesome. Saul said, God has given him into my hand, for he has shut himself in by entering a town that has gates and bars. That David is a moron. Okay, why is that a big deal? Because David's inside the city. It has gates and bars. You know what Saul's going to do? This is siege warfare. You just take your men down there and you surround the city and then you wait. You cut off food going in. You cut off water going in and you just wait. And you say, the people in your city will get to eat and drink when we get David. Hand him over and we're out of here. Life goes back to normal. So Saul's like, this idiot has entered into a walled city. Saul summoned all the people to war to go down to Keilah to besiege David. Let's go back up here a little bit. Okay. Saul summoned all the people to go to war, to go down to David, or to go down to Keilah, to besiege David and his men. David knew, so now David somehow hears that Saul has found out and he's plotting harm against him. And he said to Abiathar the priest, hey, better bring the ephod over here. I have some questions for God. So then David said, O Lord, the God of Israel, your servant has surely heard that Saul seeks to come to Keilah to destroy the city on my account. Will the men of Keilah surrender me into his hand? Will Saul come down as your servant has heard? So he asked two questions. Is Saul going to come down here? And when he does, will the men of the city turn me over to Saul? O Lord, the God of Israel, please tell your servant. There. Okay, I'm getting lost here. There we go. Come on. Right here. Okay, please tell your servant. And the Lord said, he will come down. Then David said, will the men of Keilah, he asked it again, will the men of Keilah surrender me and my men into the hand of Saul? And the Lord said, yep, they will surrender you. They're going to hand you over. Now, if you were David, what would you do? You would do what David does. Let's get out of here. David leaves. And if we read the rest of the chapter, we realize Saul hears that too, and he turns around and goes home. But do you get the point? God foreknew two things that never happened. Saul does not get to the city, and the men do not hand David over, because David ain't there. Foreknowledge does not necessitate predestination. Okay, God foreknows two things that never happen. If they were predestinated, they'd have to happen. So don't go blaming God for wanting evil. You can blame God for giving you life and making you like him, which included the attribute of freedom. But you can only blame yourself for abusing the good gift of God. Okay? That's the point. So if you take this back to Genesis, what does God want? He wants a family. God knows, again, pardon the pun, the fallout of the decision. He knows that evil's going to arise up because we're not him. We're like him, but we're not him. But God would rather have us and have that circumstance develop and be grieved by it even more than we are than never have us at all. The problem, the disconnect for us is not only don't we look at other people this way, we don't even look at ourselves that way. Stovall, I know, talks a lot about, and I talk a lot about identity and mission. It all goes back to this. God wants humans in his family. He wants humans sharing space with his presence. That is the most normal condition for God when he thinks of humans, because that is what he originally planned. God's work, and we're going to talk about in the next session, we're going to talk about the rebellions and the meta-narrative and how rebellions, just especially supernatural rebellion, just sort of change the landscape, and how that leads up to the mission of Jesus and our mission as imagers of Jesus. But that whole set of circumstances, what God wants, never changes. There was never a plan B. There is only plan A. Because the meta-narrative of Scripture is going to be, now that we've had rebellion, now that we've had the fall, and there's going to be more than one fall, more than one supernatural rebellion, more than one human rebellion. Now that we have essentially the world, going to hell in the handbasket, as the idiom we use to express it, just this total chaos. God doesn't say, I must have had a bad day. Maybe I can fix this with some other plan. There is no other plan. So the story of the Bible is God trying to return humanity back to recover its identity, to bring people back into the family, and then partner with him to repeat the process. That's what it's all about. And we are constantly thwarted by supernatural enemies and the humans that are deceived by those supernatural enemies and the effects that supernatural rebellion has on us to impede God getting his way.